The summer of 2025 marked a dramatic turning point in global trade relations. In a move that stunned both allies and rivals, the United States, led by President Trump, announced a sweeping 10% tariff on all goods imported from BRICS nations. The decision sent shockwaves through international markets as the world watched the White House double down on its America First agenda. The tariffs were not limited to a single sector. They covered everything from electronics and textiles to agricultural products and raw materials, affecting millions of jobs and businesses on both sides of the ocean. Within weeks, the situation escalated further. The administration raised tariffs to a staggering 50% on imports from India and Brazil, two of the largest BRICS economies. Headlines blared the news, and customs officers at ports scrambled to enforce the new rules. The message was clear. The U.S. was willing to risk major trade disruptions to assert its dominance. Officially, these aggressive measures were justified as a response to alleged anti-dollar conspiracies, accusations that BRICS nations were plotting to undermine the U.S. currency. But behind the rhetoric, many saw the tariffs as political theater, designed to rally domestic support and distract from deeper economic challenges. Editorials questioned the wisdom of such sweeping actions, while business leaders voiced concerns at international summits. Protests erupted outside government buildings, with citizens demanding answers and accountability. India, singled out for its continued imports of Russian oil, found itself at the center of the storm. Trade talks that had been months in the making collapsed overnight, leaving Indian exporters and officials scrambling for alternatives. Idle cargo containers piled up at ports, and press conferences grew tense as leaders tried to reassure the public. Brazil, too, faced the brunt of Washington's punitive measures. The tariffs were widely seen as an attempt to pressure the Brazilian government and disrupt its growing influence in South America. Protests broke out in major cities, and trade activity at key ports ground to a halt, threatening jobs and livelihoods across the country. What made these tariffs even more controversial was the way they were enacted. President Trump bypassed Congress entirely, signing an executive order that left lawmakers on both sides of the aisle frustrated and alarmed. Legal experts warned that this set a dangerous precedent, undermining the checks and balances at the heart of American democracy. Instead of protecting American interests, the tariffs unleashed chaos across global markets. Stock exchanges from New York to Shanghai saw wild swings, and long-standing business partnerships began to unravel. The uncertainty rippled through supply chains, raising prices for consumers and straining relationships with key allies. As August 2025 unfolds, a sense of uncertainty hangs over the world. The real threat to stability isn't coming from BRICS nations, but from Washington's unpredictable and aggressive new stance. Businesses, governments, and ordinary people everywhere are left wondering what the next move will be, and how long the world can withstand this new era of economic brinkmanship. BRICS, a coalition of emerging economies, stands for a more balanced global order, something the U.S. now sees as a threat. The bloc's growing influence, especially with new partners like Vietnam, challenges American dominance. U.S. tariffs are less about trade and more about breaking BRICS's unity, targeting India and Brazil to sow division. But this divide-and-conquer approach is backfiring, as these nations seek a seat at the global table, not out of malice, but out of necessity. By treating BRICS as adversaries, the U.S. is alienating potential partners and misreading the direction of history. The Trump administration's tariffs were a blunt tool, but their escalation revealed a calculated attempt to strong-arm BRICS members. India's tariffs, justified by its Russian oil imports, ignored the West's own dealings with Russia and poisoned years of diplomacy. Brazil's punishment was a direct response to President Lula's push for de-dollarization and a multipolar world. These actions are blatant interference, assuming economic pressure will force compliance. Instead, they've exposed U.S. insecurity and pushed BRICS nations closer together. Tariffs have become a weapon of coercion, alienating allies and emboldening rivals. The result? A more unified resistance to American dictates. Rather than fracturing BRICS, the ongoing tariff war has unexpectedly galvanized its members, especially India and China, who have historically had their share of disagreements and border tensions. In the face of mounting external pressure, these two Asian giants have found common ground, recognizing that unity is their strongest defense against economic coercion. Setting aside long-standing disputes, they have chosen to collaborate, forging a partnership that would have seemed unlikely just a few years ago. This new sense of solidarity is not just symbolic, it's strategic, as both nations realize the stakes are higher than ever. The US's heavy-handed tactics, including sweeping tariffs and sanctions, have inadvertently driven these nations to unprecedented levels of cooperation. What was once a loose economic alliance is now transforming into a formidable coalition, united by shared interests and a collective desire to resist outside domination. Together, they are creating a powerful Eurasian axis, stretching from the Pacific to the Atlantic, and reshaping the global balance of power. This axis is not just about economics, it's about asserting sovereignty and charting an independent path forward. Brazil, undeterred by external pressures, has doubled down on its calls for alternatives to the US dollar, championing the idea of a multipolar world where no single currency or nation dominates global trade. Brazilian leaders are actively seeking new partnerships and financial mechanisms to reduce dependence on Western institutions. Meanwhile, US threats against Vietnam, once seen as a potential ally, have only pushed it closer to the BRICS orbit. Vietnam, eager to diversify its alliances and protect its economic interests, has found new opportunities within the group. After deepening ties with China and other BRICS members, Vietnam has joined as a partner, signaling a major shift in regional dynamics and further strengthening the bloc's influence in Southeast Asia. Across the globe, more and more countries are turning to BRICS for protection against American unilateralism, seeking a platform where their voices can be heard and their interests safeguarded. The expansion of BRICS is now seen as a beacon for nations striving for autonomy in a rapidly changing world. The bloc is evolving rapidly, moving beyond its original mandate as an economic forum to become a political sanctuary for countries determined to preserve their sovereignty and resist external interference. Ironically, the very sanctions and pressures meant to isolate these nations are instead forging BRICS into a stronger, more determined force, one that is poised to play a defining role in the future of global geopolitics. The tariffs are economically self-destructive, raising prices for Americans and fueling inflation as partners retaliate. The claim of protecting U.S. jobs is a myth. Instead, supply chains are disrupted and trust is eroded. Legally, the executive order bypasses Congress, sparking lawsuits over constitutional overreach. Internationally, these tariffs violate WTO rules, undermining the very system the U.S. helped build. America's credibility is damaged, encouraging others to ignore global norms. The world is shifting to a law of the jungle approach, where U.S. power is no longer guaranteed. The backlash is both economic and legal, with the U.S. risking isolation. For decades, the U.S. dollar has been the bedrock of global finance, a symbol of American economic might and a tool of its geopolitical influence. Its dominance has allowed the United States to shape international trade, dictate the terms of global lending, and enforce sanctions with far-reaching consequences. But in recent years, the aggressive use of the dollar as a weapon, especially through sweeping tariffs and financial restrictions, has begun to backfire. These measures, intended to protect American interests, are now accelerating the very decline of dollar supremacy they were meant to prevent. Around the world, countries are rethinking their reliance on the greenback, seeking alternatives to insulate themselves from U.S. pressure. At the forefront of this movement are the BRICS nations: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. These emerging powers are not just talking about de-dollarization, they are actively building the infrastructure to make it a reality. By expanding currency swap agreements and increasing cross-border lending in their own currencies, BRICS countries are reducing their dependence on the dollar for trade and investment. This shift is not just symbolic, it represents a fundamental change in the way global commerce is conducted, with more and more transactions bypassing the U.S. financial system altogether. The idea of a new BRICS reserve currency, once dismissed as far-fetched, is now gaining traction. Leaders are openly discussing the creation of a shared currency or digital asset to facilitate trade and protect their economies from U.S. sanctions. This push is driven by a growing desire for financial security and autonomy, as well as a recognition that the current system leaves them vulnerable to American coercion. The momentum behind these efforts is building, with each new initiative bringing the world closer to a multipolar currency landscape. Central banks across the globe are taking notice. Many are diversifying their reserves, increasing holdings of gold, euros, and other currencies at the expense of the dollar. This trend is not limited to BRICS nations. Even traditional U.S. allies are hedging their bets, wary of being caught in the crossfire of future economic conflicts. As the dollar's share of global reserves shrinks, the foundations of its dominance are being quietly eroded. Tariffs, once seen as a tool to protect domestic industries, have become a catalyst for this transformation. Countries facing U.S. tariffs are now prioritizing de-dollarization as a matter of national security, determined to shield their economies from external shocks. The global map of trade is being redrawn, with new alliances forming and old dependencies fading. As demand for the dollar wanes, the consequences for the United States are profound. Borrowing costs are likely to rise as foreign investors seek safer or more diversified assets. The effectiveness of U.S. sanctions, once a powerful tool of foreign policy, will diminish as countries find ways to circumvent the dollar-based system. The financial landscape is becoming more volatile and unpredictable. Ironically, the tariff war, intended to defend the dollar's global standing, may be hastening its erosion. As the world adapts, the era of unchallenged dollar dominance is giving way to a new, more fragmented financial order. The 2025 tariff war signals the end of unipolarity and the rise of a multipolar world. BRICS is emerging stronger, accelerating de-dollarization and isolating the US from dynamic regions. Multipolarity offers stability and diversity in global governance, not chaos. India's measured response shows the maturity of new global powers, favoring alliances over escalation. The US, clinging to old strategies, is inadvertently strengthening the forces it seeks to contain. The world is building a more balanced system with or without American cooperation. The only question, will the US adapt or be left behind?